So just in terms of lining up our next speaker is from the Confirm Research Center. His name is Jason Curran. He's a second-year PhD student in the Maths and Stats department in the University of Limerick. His area is inverse problems, particularly those inverse problems involved in diffuse optical tomography. That's difficult to say, which he'll be talking about briefly this evening in the talk. So looking forward to hearing more, and over to you, Jason.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself there. So thank you very much for the introduction, Martin. So as you said, today I want to talk to you about imaging in the modern world. So what do I mean by imaging? Okay, I'm gonna have to click this, that's okay. So imaging, so when we think of imaging, a lot of people think of, oh, I see like a cute dog, or I made like some cupcakes and I want to take a picture of it and put it up on Instagram. And while that's fine, I kind of more want to talk about interior imaging. So what do I mean by interior imaging? So I'd like you to meet my friend Wormy. So he's a caterpillar, and Wormy is on a walk one day and he comes across, if it'll come up, an apple. Yeah. Now Wormy wants to take this apple home and have it for, have it for dinner. But he wants to make sure that the apple is nice and juicy inside. But the problem is that if he breaks open the apple to see, by the time he takes it home, it'll have gone all rotten. So Wormy needs kind of like some way of looking inside the apple without having to break it apart. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few kind of ways in which, well, maybe not caterpillars would do this, but certainly humans would do it in two different fields, so medical fields and also in seismology. Yeah? So let's start with the medical fields, and we're going to start from the very beginning. So with X-rays. So X-rays were discovered in the 1890s, so they're very old, and they were discovered by William Rontgen. Now, he wasn't the first person to actually notice X-rays, but he certainly was the first person to use them to create images and stuff like this. And actually, this image here on the left is the first image, the first X-ray that was ever taken, and it's of his wife's hand. You can even see her wedding ring here. Yeah. Now, sorry. Now, yeah. So, how do X-rays work? Well, if we take a look here and we assume that this black kind of region here is bone, for example. So imagine this is kind of like a 2D version of a hand. So this is bone, and this blue stuff here is tissue. So X-rays use ionizing waves that travel through your hand, or your arm, or your leg, or whatever. And the ionizing waves get blocked by bone, but they don't get blocked by tissue. And then a detector underneath your hand is able to detect, obviously, the waves that have managed to get through. And if it detects a gap, it knows that there's bone or something there. Yeah, and so X-rays have, as you know, loads of uses, and they have the medical applications of X-rays were recognized pretty much immediately. And in the late 1890s was the first time they were used. They were used in a surgery to remove a bullet from a soldier's, I believe, either his neck or his back or something like this. But the bullet was found using X-rays. Yeah. Now the problem though with X-rays is that they're actually shockingly dangerous when used a lot. Yeah. So when people first found them, they were just using them all the time, yeah. But they realized that there's actually implications of doing that, such as hair loss and burns, yeah. Now, don't worry about that now, yeah. You're not going to get any burns from X-rays today because people understand it now. We're 130-ish years on now from that, so it's much better understood, yeah. So let's fast forward then about 80 years to the 1970s, where we see the development of something called MRI. So this thing here is called an MRI. And what makes it different from X-rays is that it uses magnetism. Okay, so this circular kind of device that you get put into when you go through an MRI is actually a big magnet. And what the magnet is doing is that in physics, we would say it's changing the spin of certain atoms that are inside your body. And then because these atoms have changed spin, you can just think of it as just changing, they're just changing kind of direction, they can be detected, yeah? And these atoms tend to be, what's usually used is hydrogen, so that's the atoms that they try to change, because hydrogen is so abundant in your body, yeah? It's found in waters and fats and all of these great things that are obviously in abundance in your body, and then it uses those changed hydrogen atoms to create a picture. Yeah, and the best thing about MRIs is that there's no ionization. So there's no dangerous waves, hair loss, burns, none of that, yeah? Although there are a few problems with MRIs, most likely, as you can see, this patient here is going into this small little tunnel. So people who suffer from claustrophobia would have a lot of problems going into an MRI. And a lot of them would even have to be sedated, yeah. Also, people with implants can do them because it is a magnet, so you have to make sure that there's no kind of metal things in there. They're also extremely expensive to buy and they're very cumbersome. Yeah. And there's kind of a concern in the medical world that they're being a bit overprescribed. Yeah. So these are all kind of a few problems. Now, Martin mentioned above that my area of study is diffuse optical tomography. So that's what I want to talk to you about now. So optical tomography is a currently developing technology. And it also uses non-ionizing waves. It actually uses infrared waves, which are even less energetic than the waves you use to see. Okay, so very non-energetic. And the way in which it works is that we have these waves are created via a laser, and they are delivered via some like kind of tube or optical fiber to, let's say, the head. And then the wave travels through the head and then gets detected on the other side by a detector. Yeah. And then we can create an image by looking at how the wave propagates through the object, the head in this case. Now, my nephew demanded that he be included in this, so this is a drawing by him. So if you can imagine here, we have a source term here, and what you would expect is that if nothing is wrong, that the waves will just pass straight through and come out the other side. Yeah, but if there is something that's stuck in the middle of your head, let's say a tumor or something like that, the waves will get reflected and they won't act in a way that you would expect. Yeah, and they'll get deflected. So then this detector is saying to itself, okay, I shouldn't be getting waves from this source. There must be something here. Yeah. So this obviously has loads of applications and it's incredibly cheap. You could buy all of the equipment needed for this with about €100. It's also very small. You'd only need a laptop and basically a laser and 2 wires. So very kind of easy in that sense as well. So you don't need to be put into a tunnel or anything like that. You could give it to a patient at a bedside. The only problem is that it can only be used for quite thin materials. So this is fine for something like your head, let's say, but you wouldn't be able to look into like the inside of an airplane with it. Yeah. So that's my area of study there done. So that's kind of the journey that kind of medical imaging has come across over the last maybe 130-ish years. So let's have a look at a bit of seismology now. So I'm going to start with the Earth. And the first thing that I kind of think about when I think of imaging the Earth is seafloor imaging. So once again, this picture is actually by my niece, who once she found out my nephew got to include something, she had to get something in as well. So only about 5% of the seafloor has been explored, right? So there's still loads of research going on in this. Now, the way in which they do it though is they use sonar. And sonar is also used by bats and dolphins in order to hunt insects or fish, depending on which animal you're on about. So how does it work? So here's a boat and there's a transducer on the boat and it sends out waves. And when these waves hit the seafloor, they bounce back. And basically the transducer just measures how long it takes for the waves to get from the boat to the surface to back. And then as you can see, a wave hitting here is going to take less time to return than a wave hitting down here. So you know that the way that this point must be higher up and this point must be kind of deeper. Yeah, so that's kind of the basic kind of premise behind seafloor imaging. But let's go a bit deeper. Let's go below the seafloor. Let's actually go below the crust itself. So below the crust, there is this mantle. Yeah, so it's just basically like, you just think of it as like a big molten ball that's underneath the surface of the Earth. And about 100 years ago, we had no idea that this existed until in 1909, a Croatian man, who I'll not try to pronounce his name, noticed that as seismic waves moved through the Earth, they changed direction and they got deflected and they changed speeds. And that shouldn't happen. If the Earth is just a solid rock, it should just travel through. Yeah. So what did he do, or kind of like, what was his take from this? Well, it must be being deflected by some layer. And in fact, today, this boundary is called the Moho boundary. Yeah, after his, you can see Moho is at the start of his second name. So this boundary is the boundary between the mantle, so all the fiery kind of bits, and the crust. Yeah, and from this we also found out that the crust is only about 50 kilometers thick, which is not very thick. Yeah. And you can see how the deflections are kind of